A todas y a todos.
Good day to all of you. I am Osvaldo Chacon. I am the Counselor President of the Electoral Institute of Chiapas. I cordially welcome you all to this seminar on behalf of the institutions who have brought us together, and they are part of the scenario of democracy and elections in the world. The analysis for today is going to focus on political violence against women in their gender and their political and electoral rights. I want to greet our panelists for today, Leticia Bonifaz, who is an independent expert of the Committee of CEDAW, Luciana Locio, who is ex-minister of the Higher Court of Elections of Brazil, Katia Uriona, she is an international consultant, and also Carla Humphrey, who is counselor of the National Electoral Institute, and they are going to be speakers today. I also want to greet Raul Contreras. He is the director of the School of Law of UNAM, and Manuel Carrillo Poblano, who is a coordinator of international relations of the National Electoral Institute. We thank you very much for all the bodies of elections that are lending us our support. I also want to thank the UNAM, the audience of Latin America and Europe and Africa who are with us today through the social networks and through technology. And today it allows us to create panels such as these that are of the highest quality possible. This permanent seminar is a place where we can reflect on these topics as experts and representatives of electoral agencies and the audience who is interested in the electoral agenda. And we share and exchange experiences regarding the best practices regarding preparation and development of democratic processes within the context that we are living in this pandemic. This seminar is organized by the INE, which is the National Electoral Institute, and the UNAM. And it is very important for us to understand the challenges of the organization of elections within context of elections that are quite complex. This is our 6th edition. So since October 2020, we have had these sessions that have talked about these topics of elections in the US, elections within the context of the pandemic and COVID, and elections in Bolivia. Today, we have the opportunity of listening to experts who are very talented and will talk about political violence against women in gender and in their rights of political rights and electoral rights. We haven't had any political movement that is more important and powerful and revolutionary in the world in the last 30 years, such as feminism. And in many democracies of the world, the progress that we have had to be able to guarantee their political representation as women and to have complete equality among men and women has been very important. However, the feminist movements have also realized that there are still obstacles that are hindering the free and participation of women in politics. That's why lately we have had reforms of different types with the purpose of eradicating political violence against women. In our country, specifically in Mexico in 2020, they approved different reforms for different laws, organic laws. We have the general law of electoral institutions, the general law of electoral aspects, the general law of political parties, the general law of electoral crimes. And these measures will have an impact on the electoral process that we are going through in 2021. Subnationally, we have also had various reforms that have been approved, and also the electoral administrative bodies have signed agreements and guidelines to guarantee the free participation of women in politics, free of violence against them. That's why we all must celebrate this space of dialogue. And I want to Thank you for the invitation of opening this session, which is so important from the perspective of the experts that are with us today. Now, I want to give the floor to the director of the School of Law of UNAM, Mr. Raul Contreras. So please take the floor. Thank you very much, President Counselor, Mr. Chacon. Good day to all of you who are watching us live through the social networks. We are broadcasting through our official page of INE and of the Autonomous National University of Mexico. It is of great pleasure to welcome you all on behalf of Lorenzo Cordova, who is the president of the National Electoral Institute and of the School of Law of this sixth edition of this permanent seminar of democracy and elections throughout the world. Since we are about to celebrate Women's International Day, we have chosen the topic of political violence against women, or gender-based political violence against women. The truth is that the participation of women in the political life of our society is a topic that is so important and of great interest. We must remind those who are listening to us that for many centuries, women did not have a citizenship and did not have electoral rights. It's until the 20th century where we begin to see fundamental changes in society. First of all, we have the opportunity of women going to universities, of public universities especially. After that, to be able to reach the citizen status in various countries, and this didn't take place until the 50s, where women were able to reach citizenship and to have full rights, at least regarding legal aspects. Then in the 60s, a very important happening occurred, which was the discovery of birth control that gave women the opportunity of deciding on their body and their times and places. And finally, all the legal reforms and constitutional reforms that the President Counselor Chacon mentioned that have created a new political arena for women. The truth is that violence against women, political violence against women with gender-based has the objective today to annul the political rights of women. There is still a lot of resistance against women having the right of participating in public and political life. The world has recognized that women have full rights of voting, of being elected in all public positions, to participate in the creation of government policies and as well as public administration, and to perform all public activities and all government actions to be able to promote an inclusive democracy and to also participate in NGOs and associations that are interested in the public and political life of the country. The way to fight against gender-based political violence against women is to create a new institutional culture and generate new practices within political parties and in all arenas of society. We have to make an awareness regarding women and give them the necessary tools so they can fight against political violence in their own careers. We must remember that during the elections in Mexico, 2014, 2015, we had 38 cases of political violence against women in Baja California, Chiapas, State of Mexico, Guerrero, Morelos, Oaxaca, Sonora, and Tabasco. And now we are going through electoral campaigns, and We are going to have the largest and most complicated elections in Mexico. Violence against politicians and against women appears again. So I think that this seminar is very timely, and we will have the great pleasure of being able to listen to distinguished thinkers and women who have participated in this cultural change in the way they participate as women in political life. So on behalf of INE and the law school, we cordially welcome you. Also on behalf of Leticia Bonifaz, Luciana Locio, who is law of attorney and ex-minister of the Higher Court of Electoral, we have Katia Oriona and Carla Humphrey. So we are going to have a great opportunity to learn, to have an opening to these academic profiles. So thank you once again for watching us, and I truly hope you enjoy this seminar that we have prepared for you. Thank you very much. And your comments are very timely to begin. But first, I want to give the floor to Manuel Carrillo, who is going to address the audience on behalf of INE. Thank you very much, President Counselor. Lorenzo Cordova asked me to send his greetings and to welcome you and to make a very brief reflection. This permanent seminar on democracy and world elections has considered not only to reflect and analyze on some of the elections that have taken place and that will be developed throughout this year. The law school, as well as the National Electoral Institute, and we have incorporated this permanent seminar of topics that are so relevant within the democratic agenda. Today, and before celebrating Women's International Day on March 8th, we have this topic, which is gender-based political violence against women. And this topic expresses the most important lackings that we have in democracy. It's not only an aspect of political rights, it has to do with dignity and respect and freedom and equality. If we talk about democracy, we do not criticize or question their principles or their superiority as humans and in politics versus the other regimes. But we have questions regarding their capacity and authority to govern the current society on topics that have brought us together today: gender-based political violence against women. And we have to defend their political and electoral rights. Kant, in his work, The Fundamentals of Customs, said, open quotation mark, in the reign of goals, everything has price or dignity. And those that have a price can be substituted by something equivalent. Contrary to that, what is found above every price and that doesn't allow an equivalent, that is called dignity. But that brings together the condition for something to take place doesn't have a price or value. It's an internal value, which is dignity. That's how he concludes. With Kant, we see that dignity is a right to have rights, and it's a willingness of the capacity of acting with autonomy and freedom. There are no meritocratical categories of dignity. The autonomy of willingness is the will itself, which is the higher value of morality. Morality states that we have to act in this way and not any other way. Today's topic brings us together to those of topics of rights and duties. It's a moral topic to go against political violence that women suffer because of their gender. In democracy, we have to transform this situation, showing respect for women, for their capacity to self-determine themselves, for their reasoning. That is why the organizations of societies have not been able to reflect still that women have the same rights as women. It is a fact that women are doubly poor, that suffer from exclusion, battery, and violence because they are frequently facing fewer rights of defending who they are. Kant Koper said, democracy cannot be better than Democrats. We as Democrats are the ones who have to work for this improvement. In today's panel, we have democratic, dignified women that are thinking and acting against political violence that women suffer because of their gender. Thank you so much for accepting this event, and let's prepare ourselves for a good session. Thank you very much, Manuel. Yes, we are ready to listen to our experts, to our panelists. They are each going to have 15 minutes for their presentation. The audience who is listening to us can send us your questions, and at the end, we will have a Q&A session to exchange opinions. So we are first of all going to give the floor to Leticia Bonifaz. We all know who she is, and she is an independent expert of the Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women in CEDAW. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Osvaldo. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to the School of Law, to INE, to my director. I am so glad that we are talking about this topic because it's so relevant. Recently, I have been investigating the history of feminism and what happened in the century 18 and 19 in Europe and in Mexico in century 20. Violence against women already exists in the first electors that decided to go to the streets and in the US, or in those places that you can imagine in Russia, Denmark, Norway, or Scandinavian worlds. So why was there a confrontation against women when they wanted to participate in politics? Well, because the rights were of men. I'm talking about the Charter of Men that was thought of for men, because the clear determination here is public and private. Private was for women and public for men. So those women that tried to go into the public life after the French Revolution were excluded, and they called them horrible things that we still hear today. And following that line of thought, violence began without it being called violence in all areas. So what were the most common adjectives? Well, that they were rioters, and they also referred to their physical aspects, to the sexual definition. If it's a woman that's going to participate in public, well, then she's a lesbian, or she's this or that, or she's a single mom, or she's this or that. So they had all these offensive adjectives for them, trying to avoid the fundamental aspect that was going on here. So then I went to Alejandra Kollontai's history, and when she wants to be the first ambassador in Norway, the press attacked the way she dressed, what she wore that day, when a man would never be criticized for that. So now in Mexico, we are seeing our situation, and the electoral struggle began in the 20th century. And of all the electors, what catches my attention is one that we have not paid good attention to, who was Margarita Robles de Mendoza. Margarita Robles de Mendoza also talks how they were offended. She would put up a sign, and you can see pictures of her on internet, and she would wear this sign on her clothes, and she would say, I have the right to vote. And she also wrote a book where she talks about what they were talking about, the women who wanted to vote. I'm talking about the 20s and 30s, and of an interview that she had with President Portes Gil. And there they were asking, do women have the right to vote before the constitutional vote? And he, as an attorney, would say yes, but that the social and political conditions were the ones that would not allow them to participate.
Right after the right to municipal vote was awarded and then federal vote, women started to vote, but few of them were voted for. And that needs to be analyzed. And once again, because there was a stigma, the women that worked for politics was stigmatized because she was out of the frame where she should be. And that stigma is still there, especially if it was a married woman. She should stay at home and do homework and do house chores, and she shouldn't be being a rioter in public environment. So when we read what Margarita Robles de Mendoza wrote, she said something that I love. And she said, why are men so upset because we as women participate in politics? And she says, the only explanation is given by physics because two bodies cannot occupy the same space. And they are going to feel, and they are feeling displaced because the space that they are not taking, we are going to take it. And this aggression against us is because we are going to take a space that they believe is their space with these women that are taking advantage of something while they should be at home. This, what Margarita says, is fundamental because it's a physical explanation. Two bodies cannot occupy the same space. And so far, as of today, the violent reactions are because of those that feel displaced or those that feel that they are the owners of a place. On the other hand, the tradition and culture continues looking at as an exception the participation of women in politics. However, nowadays, what we need to take into account is why they are there. Why, if political violence is happening in this level with this level of problems, is because the violence against women is going it's growing, and political violence it just wants. During the pandemic, domestic violence increased and political violence is also happening stronger and stronger. And in Mexico, we have to talk about the difference between the urban and the rural area because, for example, myself, being from Chiapas, I have had the opportunity to work with Osvaldo, in particular gender-based violence cases. So what we can say is that the old habits and customs of the indigenous communities are actually harder on the participation of women in politics. And thinking about the electoral topic as a different career, men usually compete as a 100 race, and we are always competing with obstacles. Even though they say it's a flat 100-meter race, no, we have obstacles. And as soon as you get rid of one, someone comes and puts another one that you have to jump, that you have to overcome. Why? Because if we look at political violence based upon the reforms of the laws that have already been mentioned by Osvaldo, many times is, I'm not going to allow you to participate, but if you are already enrolled, then I'm not going to share complete information, or I'm going to send you to a loser district, or you will not receive the funds to compete under the same conditions. And if you win, I will not allow you to take office. And if you do take office, I will not allow you to work in your office as needed. And I will organize reform like it has happened in Chiapas so that you cannot get there, so that you have to be in San Cristobal because we cannot have you with us. So if you look at it, is one obstacle after another one. So it looks like the race is the same, but it isn't because we are always with a load of all traditions in the system that we have been living for these many years. So what's happening today and what's next? I believe that we have the advantage of this new regulations that have already been included in the laws and that were not so difficult to think about. Because part of the reality, everything that's been put on the law are actually behaviors that have already happened. The difference is that now they have been categorized as crimes, and now you can go to a court or to the electoral body to say, this is happening, so consequences will take place. We need consequences because otherwise it looks like we are not going to be able to overcome the obstacles and have the conditions of equality that we deserve. So when we think about where is actually gender-based violence located, well, it starts with disqualifying the capacity and capability of women. And let me talk about one paradox. As was telling you that in the case of Mexico, the suffragist movement started in the 70s, but in the 20s, actually, when Yucatan women gathered in 1916, most of them were teachers. Why? Because teachers had already a social stance in the society, and they were the ones that tutored children, that literate them, and gave them knowledge to boys and girls. Many of the men that were students of those teachers voted because there were men, but the teachers who had more capacity, more information couldn't do it because they were women, even though they contributed to the formation of those men to become citizens. So the fight for vote that many said was, does do women have the same capability? And the denial of the presence of women in education was also part of a policy of politics in Mexico. The first women that went to a college or to high school were at the ending of the 19th century. The first attorney graduated in 1998 and then into the 20th century. But what do I mean? I mean that when you doubt about the capacity of women, when you doubt about if they are capable of going into politics, now we have everything on the doubt. Because men, they don't need to prove anything. Just because they are men, they are supposed to be able to develop properly in the political arena. But as women, you have to prove that you can with that office and that you can also do everything else that you are supposed to do at home because of the traditional roles that we have. Because no man is going to feel guilty sitting in his chair and thinking that he should be doing something at home. And women, it's going to be thinking about her two roles. So I believe and I insist we have progressed and a lot. And I'm very, very happy with respect to law making progress. But the cultural progress that we need to continue having depends upon one awareness, the real awareness, and the clarity of why we have all these problems, why we still have these obstacles and this sticky floor, and why it's so difficult for women to break out all that. And once we are clear on that, and once we have analyzed all the actions taken in order to achieve that, we will have a different Mexico and a better one with different conditions for participation. Thank you, Doctor. It's been a great learning listening to you. Thank you for this historical evolution overview of the political fight of women in Mexico. We can see how, from the very beginning of our modern state, we have the presence of this bias of gender that has represented an obstacle for equality between men and women. You also reminded us how the movement began in the 20th century in Mexico and how it started with an important way of doing it. Yes, with the right to vote, but also with the right to be voted for, and the many obstacles that need to be overcome. And how all these obstacles are actually enlarged in some cultural context, like the ones that we see in the study that you participated with in some of the Chiapas regions, and how currently the most powerful weapon that women have is the jurisdictional guarantee of their rights, but how still there are challenges to make them known and to achieve the cultural transformations that need to support these type of affirmative measures and actions. If you allow me, I would like to pass the floor to Luciana Locio, former justice of the Electoral Higher Court of Brazil, and she's currently a member of the Electoral Commission in the Association of Attorneys. The floor is all yours. Can you hear me well? Yes, we can hear you well. Good afternoon, everyone. In Brazil, it's already good afternoon. In Mexico, good morning. I am very pleased, President Chacon, for being here with so many of my Mexican friends. Raúl Bustamante, Manuel Carrillo, Mari Carmen Figueroa. I love her so much. She's a dear friend. Carla and Katia. They are dear friends joined in an important fight that we have done with our feminist flag together. Every time I'm invited to participate in a Mexican event, I feel very pleased because it's an honor for me, because Mexico is an example for us, especially for Brazil, because Mexico, for example, currently has gender parity in the two chambers, the higher and the lower. In Brazil, we are far from that. We are walking on it. We are learning a lot from our friends from Latin America. However, there's a lot to be done. We are going through difficult times with the important political violence, for example, against our former president, Irma, and now with an administration that it's very radical with feminist banners. We need to keep on fighting for our spaces. But we are progressing. We are actually progressing. And that is something good that we need to highlight as well. In the Electoral Court of Brazil, we have a mission. We have a jurisdictional benefit that is very important for, how can I put it, to improve our democracy. Because in our parliament, we have few women. Or last 2018 election, we were able to obtain 15% women. But before that, I think it was 10% at the most. So the uh, bills for laws had not progressed, did not succeed. On the other hand, the judicial branch started to work on it and started to make decisions so that we could progress with feminist policies. And this is what happened when I was in court. I was there for 6 years from 2011 to 2017. And we had majority women in the electoral court. It was quite an important time because of 7 justices, four were women. And we started talking about many feminist matters so that we could keep on progressing. And we were successful. For example, Brazil lacks a law on gender-based political violence, but now we have a bill that has already been approved by the House of Representatives. It is currently at the federal chamber, and the general concept is political violence is the aggression, either physical or sexual, against women that is either a candidate or who has already been elected in respect to political representation with the purpose of don't allow her to take office or to make decisions that go against her beliefs. And of course, I'm not going to read the whole bill, but that is the main concept that we were able to approve after making important decisions in electoral justice. Political violence in Brazil is present in many manners. The first one is that the quota law in Brazil is present since 1995. So it's 2021. So we're talking about 16 years. That's a lot of time, but we have not progressed that much in that field. We 26 years actually, not 16, but 26, more than 20 years with this law and very little progress. We did not have a legal remedy to talk about the non-compliance. Justice did not acknowledge a political action against it. Only in 2016, when we had majority of women in the higher electoral court, is when we were able to approve an interpretation so that an electoral remedy, an electoral action was accepted to acknowledge gender-based political violence against women in the creation of the list of political parties. That was a very important framework in our jurisprudence in such a level that after that we had important progress. Many electoral decisions were made and all together helped to the growth of which I will talk about later. But it's about uh, uh, women representation. So in 2016, because of jurisprudence construction, we approved the management of an electoral action. And right after that, in 2018, the higher court in Brazil decided and resolved that the electoral legislation provided 30% of quota for the list of candidates. However, it also provided only 5% of the money for women and 10% of the propaganda. So, a group of women from also the district attorney went to the higher court to request a construction based upon the constitution because the law says that the court determines 30% of women, then how can they receive only 5% of the money for electoral funding and 10% for electoral propaganda to be visible as candidate? So in 2018, the higher court resolved that there should be an appropriate construction, that it should be 30% of the money for electoral funding of political parties and also 30% of the funds for electoral propaganda for women. So it was quite an important framework because in 2018 elections, this decision made by the higher court was in March and the elections were in October. So we had a 50% growth of women representation in the House of Representatives. Why? Well, because after many analyses and many debates, we concluded that the decision made by the higher court was very important because the political campaign needs money and the candidates did not have money to ask for more votes. So it was very important for this progress.
The higher electoral court also had a very important recession. With the Supreme Court in Brazil, we have two sources of funding for campaigns. We have a fund of political parties, which is the one that the government gives the political parties. We call this the Fund for Political Parties. And we also have a special funding for campaign. And electoral justice assigns to political parties depending on how many representations they have. There are all these calculations that are made. So after the decision of the Supreme Court, the higher electoral court also decided that we should have this division of money observing 30%. That is according to the quotas law of Brazil. And since the electoral law also stated that the electoral parties had to have at least 5% of their money assigned for female candidates, and the political parties were not doing this. They weren't even respecting this 5%. So the electoral court in 2018 decided that if the political parties did not reserve this minimum of 5%, the quotas of political parties would be rejected, meaning that the coming year, the political party would have no public funding. And that was a very important decision to enforce this in political parties. So 2018 was really important regarding decisions made. We began in 2016 and it concludes in 2019. The other important decision that was made regarding electoral justice took place in 2019 after the municipal elections of 2016. But before the municipal elections of 2020, which was this last year, and we decided that if the political parties that want to use these electoral decisions that had to do from an interpretation of its jurisprudence, it was possible for those political parties could be managed to take it before justice if the political parties were not meeting this quota law with fraudulent candidacies, with ghost candidacies of women. If this happened, the political parties would lose all of their representation before the municipality. And that was very important because a political party presents their list with 30% women. But what would happen is that one of the women was the mother of the main candidate. The other was the daughter. The other woman was the secretary of the political parties. So these women that were there on this list were just there to meet the percentage, but they weren't real candidates. So the court decided that if they had ghost or fake candidates, the political party would lose its representation in the legislature. And this was a decision that was made right before the municipal elections. This took place in 2019, and in 2020 we had the elections. So this was very important for us, pedagogically speaking. So in the municipal elections of 2020, we had progress of 30% of women as councilors And so this means that we were able to prove the importance of this decision of the electoral court so that political parties would be aware of the fact that they had to follow the law and to have women candidates that were true candidates, not as ghost or fake candidates. And also in 2019, the Electoral Higher Court created a management committee of gender policies. We did not have a committee designated to observe, oversee these gender policies. And the creation of this committee was really interesting because in the elections of 2018, the OEA with Gerardo de Casa, which is also a Mexican friend, was in Brazil to be the observer of the elections. And in the final report of OEA, they made this suggestion for Brazilian justice to create this committee for gender. And as the president of the Electoral Commission of the Institutes of Attorneys, I included this report, and it was requesting the higher court to create this gender committee. And then back then there was only one woman on the higher court, and that was Jose Bebe, and she is from the Supreme Court of Brazil. So the justice went forward with the creation of this committee, and that's why we have this very important institute within electoral justice, where we can work on the struggle for more women in politics, how to fight against political violence that women suffer in the electoral political system in Brazil. So I think I spoke 15 minutes. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity, for the invitation. I send a kiss to my Mexican friends, Lorenzo Cordova, who is the president of INE. I had forgotten to mention him. So thank you very much, Mr. President Chacon Rojas. Luciana, thank you so much. You made an excellent presentation and perfect Spanish and right on time. I apologize for the combination of Portuguese and Spanish. No, you were perfect. Thank you so much for sharing the Brazilian perspective of how you have evolved in protecting political rights of women in your country. In a compared perspective, we see that you have followed history similar to Mexico. First, you had to have judicial backup that motivated political agreements and constitutional reforms and legal reforms. And what you have accomplished between 2016 and 2019 has been so important. And I think it's wonderful that you have equality in the list of candidates. And at the end, you talk about this committee of gender policies, which is very similar to what we do in our Commission of Gender Equality in the Electoral Institute. So now I am happy to give the floor to Carla Humphrey, because she is the head of this commission. So it will be very interesting to listen to her. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much, President Osvaldo Chacon, for your introduction. It's always a great pleasure to be with Raul Contreras, who is the director of the School of Law UNAM, Manuel Carrillo, who is always running after us to have these seminars with personalities that are so distinguished like the ones we have today, and Mari Carmen Alanis, who is also promoting these themes. And because of her, I met Luciana Locio, who I admire and love, and also Katia Uriona, who I admire greatly. She has done a lot of work in Bolivia and in Latin America. And of course, our Mexican star, Dr. Boniface, who has my full admiration. So I would like to make my presentation, and I'm going to begin with a book of last year. I think the great majority of us have read Mona Lina Krug of 2020, and she tries to tell the story of political violence. And in global genealogy, she says that the first time they tried to name the harassment of women who had political positions, that this begins in the South Hemisphere in Bolivia at the end of the 90s in Acogol, which is for the counselors of Bolivia. And they called this phenomenon of harassment of men towards women as political harassment. I'm sure our dear friend Katia will be talking more about this. Then in the south of Asia, at the beginning of the year 2000, Women in Politics condemned political violence against women, and by 2007, the International Association of Asia, Southern Asia, they talked about violence against women in politics, and they also include physical violence, psychological violence, and sexual violence. In Kenya, also many factors occurred at the end of the year 2000, and they also began that this violence be recognized, that women were suffering who were participating in politics, and not only with candidates, but also against voters. And they had a very unfortunate case, but it made the phenomenon very clear with the case of Kenya of 2008 with Flora Teran. She was in her campaign for the parliament. She was threatened and beaten almost to death. She was in the hospital. Of course, she wasn't able to continue with her campaign. She lost that election, but this case had international coverage. And of course, it was also included in the yearly report of Amnesty International. And that's where we are able to see political violence in all countries. Now it's named political violence or gender-based political violence. In Mexico, like Boniface was saying, we began with the political participation of women, allowing them to vote in 1947 in municipalities. And last year, 67 years have elapsed since women can vote and be elected for political positions. And we did not vote until 1955. In 1974, look how many years had to elapse, 20 years almost. We include equality among women and men in the Constitution. And this is the basis to have judicial equality in rights, labor rights, and social safety. If we talk about electoral terms and also access to political spaces, since 1974 to 93, we did not see many women participating in politics or being elected. So in 1993, it was a recommendation, or it was begging the political parties. They included quotas to tell the political parties to have women be running for these positions of in politics. In 1996, we set up a quota of 70-30, no more than 70 of the same gender. Of course, it was men back then, without any sanctions. And in 2002, we began with the same percentage. In 2008, it changes to 60-40, and some sanctions are put into place. For example, the list can be modified to make sure that the gender quota is met. In Mexico, we had a very unfortunate case of Las Juanitas, where the formulas where they had to have women running for political positions was headed by women, but once they took the position, they had to ask for some kind of leave so that the men would take over the position in the House of Representatives. Then our country modifies Article 1st of the Constitution, and it's been 10 years of this reform, and it sets forth the guarantee of human rights, the interpretation as a human, and that authorities, all of us, have to promote respect and guarantee human rights following the principles of interdependence, universality, and going forward. Hand in hand with this reform of 2011, women of different political parties made a request before INE, which was IPE back then, to ask them how they were going to guarantee that the 60-40 quota was met in the elections of 2012. And we're talking about that the campaigns began a year before that. And then a director of IFE sentenced, and we had 1264 with Justice Alanis was one of the main supporters of all this movement, and it set forth very important aspects for women to go forward. First of all, you would have a woman that would also have to have a woman substitute and alternating men and women, because of course they would meet the quotas as political parties, so they were always in the last parts of the list. And they also stated that without mattering what method they used in the political parties, they had to meet the established quotas of the law. There were no safeguards or processes that they could use to not meet the quota. And that's how we went forward in 2012 to increase the amount of women in our House. And in 2014, we have the principle of equality of gender in our Constitution. And of course, it is used in all the future elections, and we talked about horizontal and vertical integration. And thanks to this principle of parity, in 2018, we have what our previous speakers mentioned, what we call the first legislature of parity, with 48.2% of women in the House of Representatives and 49.2% in the Senate. And what does this legislature of parity offer? And these are the tangible consequences that we can see, that more women are in these spaces of public decision-making. In 2019, in the official Gazette of the Federation, they published a reform that's called Parity in Everything, or Total Parity. That of 2014 made the political parties to have women running for political positions in federal elections and other elections. And here we talk about results. They talk about parity for the integration of the 3 levels of government, of the 3 powers, of the autonomous institutions, and also the regulatory agencies and indigenous institutions. So now you do not just have to have women running, you have to have results that are equal. And the other important consequence of this legislature of parity is the legal reform regarding gender-based political violence. We had 8 bills that were reformed to give us a framework to prevent, sanction, and eradicate political violence that is gender-based. And many years had to elapse until we were able to have this legal framework. Many bills were presented, around 40. It's very important to say that the main topic, or the main reason why this reform was held back, is because you had a Mexican government that did not want to have this type of reform. They did not want to have crazy justices going after men that were harassing or accosting women. So finally, they published it on April 13th of this last year, meaning that it hasn't even been a year of having this regulatory framework. And this means that we are at the height of different countries that have typified gender-based political violence, Ecuador, Bolivia, and recently El Salvador. And we will be paying close attention to what Luciana Locio talked about what happens in Brazil with this typification of political violence, of gender violence. This reform establishes relevant things. So it talks about concept, definition, and different behaviors that can typify political violence, but it also talks about 3 ways to deal with it. First of all, administrative way through administrative laws for public servants, and the criminal one, we have it named as or prosecuted as a violence. So you can go to the DA of electoral crimes at a federal and state levels. And another one that I call mixed, because you begin with a complaint before INE or the state electoral institutes, but it's taken to the electoral courts. In INE, it's a specialized court. And there's another way, which is through lawsuit of protection of rights that is created specifically for political violence. And the legal definition is in 20 BIS of women having access to a violence-free life. And it said that any violence has to do with anything that goes against women in political or public arenas that limit, annul, or put down the rights of a woman or women and access to fully carry out her activity, the free development of public administrations, the free organization, as well as being able to run for political positions through candidacies. We should also underline that this Article 20 talks about different behaviors that materialize political violence against women and that can be denounced through the 4 means that I already mentioned. They also reformed, like I said, this general law of women accessing a life free of violence, and it also includes gender-based political violence against women. And we also have another law that has 14 assumptions to typify political violence, the general law of institutions and electoral procedures, also 5 hypotheses. And it also sets forth that in a generic way, any other action that damages the dignity, integrity, or freedom of women in carrying out their political electoral rights. So the legal assumptions of the law in electoral law is to be an obstacle to women to not run as people in charge of political positions, and, for example, hiding invitations to be candidates or any information that has to do with the freedom of participating inside political parties or of any position of electoral matters. So we also have the reform of political parties, and this reform to be able to sanction and fight against gender-based violence does not only clarify political violence and the behavior that you can materialize political violence, but it also sets forth responsibilities for the authorities, for the political parties. It also establishes clear sanctions. And I think it's necessary to say that now that we have, as authorities, the obligation, especially the electoral authorities, of implementing the reform of total parity as well as political violence that is gender-based, we have to say that today, different to other political aspects, things are happening. Yes, you can deny the candidacy of a person that has been sanctioned or has been prosecuted with something related to gender-based political violence, where there are also sanctions, time in jails, reduction of rights for those who commit gender-based violence. And that's why it's so important for us to understand that women throughout Mexico can understand that they have the right of running for these political positions or to do whatever they want in political positions at a municipal level, state level, or federal level, that they have all the rights to defend their political electoral rights. And of course, if they suffer gender-based political violence, they have to report these actions of political violence. I'm going to refer to these 4 actions that we are working on in INE to reform the gender-based political violence. We have a registry of these people who have done some kind of action of gender-based. We can find it on the website of INE, and any person can have access to it. We also think that it inhibits gender-based violence because you have the name of the person that is being sanctioned, gender, if they are a PRAN candidate, if they are running to be candidate, if they're already in a political position, the place where they were sanctioned, the file number, the date, the authority that sanctioned them, the behavior, and also how long they will be in this registration of sanctioned parties. We also set forth the time that a sanctioned person will have to be there on this list. For a minor one, it's 3, then it goes to 4, 5, and if they go back, they have a second offense, it goes up even more. So it's all related to all women who run for a political position, are pre-candidates, candidates, or any other position. And it's very important to not have this violence against women. And also when violence goes against a woman who is indigenous, Afro-American, or elderly, or has a sexual diversity, or is handicapped. This is a national registry, and it will allow us for the very first time in our country so that authorities can share this information and we can carry out the necessary analysis to determine if a person meets all the requirements to run as a candidate, and especially to be an honest person. We have sentences in Jalapa that was confirmed by the higher court where they clearly state that a person who violates a woman, politically speaking, cannot be a candidate because they are not considered an honest person. So that's the obligation of the administrative authorities that have to check this information, and they resolve if a person can run for a candidate or not. Unfortunately, this registry that began on September 7th, now we have 21 people enrolled with information of yesterday, 17 men for women, and the federal entities that have the highest number of cases of political violence is Veracruz, you have 7, then you have Campeche 4, Quintana Roo 4, Yucatan 2, Hidalgo, Oaxaca, Sonora, and Tabasco also have 1 case each of political violence. We also created a procedure to attend to the reports, and this procedure is with gender perspective. We do risk analysis, safety plans, we offer cautionary measures as well as protection measures to safeguard the integrity and life of women. So another mechanism that we have is that every ordinary session of the General Council has to present a report of all the complaints and reports in this topic. And since this reform was published up to now, we have 36 complaints, 25 of them, they are non-competent, and in the great majority of the cases, this incompetence has been confirmed by the higher court. And we also have to have follow-up with these remittances that we share with other authorities to the political parties so that we can have our own registry with timely information that will allow the authorities to carry out these analyses. And finally, the guidelines that make the political parties that we also approved last year to deal with these cases of gender-based political violence, to have programs, to have technical autonomy, to have committees that will help these women defend their rights, measures of repair, and we also established two things that I think relevant. The first way that we that are against the violence of women is that they ask them to run, but then they don't give them resources or time on TV and radio. So we said that they have to give women in campaign a percentage of their funding and 40% of time on radio and television. And the second thing that came from the initiatives of organizations of civil societies of women that was once again taken by political parties is a statement that we talk about 3 of 3 against violence. And what we wanted to do was include it as a requirement. But as you can see, the synergies of the political parties dominated by men showed that they didn't want to do this. So now it's just a good faith format, and that they have to have an affidavit that they are telling the truth. And if they don't tell the truth, it's a crime. And we all have to denounce any type of crime. And if they don't do this, they are not considered an honest person to be able to run for a political position. And the 3 assumptions is that they can't have people who have sentences due to domestic violence, sexual violence, and they cannot be a person that owes alimony. And this agreement is mandatory for all political parties. And we will also be going over it and doing risk analysis to see if we can do and follow these statements. And finally, the monitoring of radio and television and news. Since 2018, we had included the perspective of gender, equality of gender, and we have also included gender-based political violence, especially for stereotypes of gender. And it's clear to assume it, but we prove it again that when we talk about pre-campaigns of men and women, there are 3 times more time dedicated to men. In inclusive language, the percentage of men referring to these campaigns are not including inclusive language compared to what women do. And in the analysis that we set forth to identify stereotypes of gender, we also talked about making women like into a thing, subordination, physical traits, the way they dress, etc. So we were determined that out of the 400 more or less topics that were analyzed, in one of these we did determine a stereotype of gender because of age against a woman. So I think that we are going forward, but I think we have limited cases. We have unfortunate cases, and a way of violence against women is not giving them timely justice. There are no sentences because you have frozen cases in the DA's offices, and they go on and on forever. So I think we have to redesign this statement of 3 of 3. And number 2, we have to echo the fact that many international agencies, like the Inter-American Court, has told us once and again that women, especially in these cases that are sexually harassed, are not receiving timely justice on behalf of the Mexican government. And they have made the Mexican state to take measures in these cases. So I think we have to underline these cases of gender violence that women suffer in Mexico, and that political violence is just one of these. Thank you very much, all very much.
Thank you, Councillor Humphrey. You have given us a very good explanation of all these framework of the institutions and the legal framework in Mexico to guarantee access of women in a free manner to exercise politics. It has been particularly interesting to see how we have changed or representation quotes to reach parity, and how this wonderful framework that has been with it. Now we have the challenge to meet the expectations that have been created throughout our country. And of course, it all depends upon the institutions, the federal institutions, the local institutions, the jurisdictional ones, the criminal ones. But I also, as Councillor Humphrey said, the ethical responsibility that political parties have with these constitutional principles. So we are currently under a very controversial situation in a state of our country, and that's a clear sample that not everything is in the hands of the authorities. We act based upon what needs to be done. But the ethical commitment is on the field of political parties. Now we're going to pass the floor to Katia Uriana. She was the president of the electoral body in Bolivia, and she has a lot of experience, and I'm looking forward to listen to what she has to say and to learn from it. Welcome, Katia Uriona. Can you hear us? I'm just trying to share my screen. Give me a second. Oh, take all the time you need.
Perdón,
My apologies. I need a few seconds because I had it ready, but as it always happens, something is not working.
En lo que está preparando la intervención de...
As you get everything ready to share your screen, I would like to say that she was the president of the Electoral Court of Bolivia.
Sí, esperamos tantito. Ahorita se soluciona ahí el tema de la presentación.
We are going to wait just a little bit until her presentation is fixed. Now we can maybe grab a coffee or drink a sip of our coffee.
Lista, ya la vemos, Katia.
I think we can see it now, Katia. Thank you.
Muy bien.
Ucha, lo siento mucho, ahora sí, ya estoy.
I think I'm ready, and my apologies, please. I want to say thank you, truly, for this space and to be able to participate in this interesting panel. My greetings to all the members of the INE, and of course, thank you to the representatives of the School of Law from UNAM. It's a great pleasure to share this table with so many friends with whom I have already participated in common fights. And thank you to those listening to this space. I'm going to make a presentation that has more to do with the grounds of how political violence is expressed so that we can end up analyzing the impact and consequences thereto in the political life and participation of women. So I would like to begin by presenting to you a reference that I believe is important that we bear in mind when we talk about gender-based violence. We have to first identify that we're talking about the patriarchal system and what are the grounds on which the system is supported? Well, we have to talk about a cultural, social, historical, and symbolic construction that is based on the notion of male domination over women. This notion is actually extended in all of our communities. It's a system that is also based on an alleged inferiority of women that gives place to a set of individual social and institutional practices that have been present in order to maintain or reinforce the subordination of women. From this patriarchal ideology, we see how women are given special roles that are because of their gender, with which they maintained and stressed other means of dominations, like Agar said. Gendered violence is based on this notion of subordination of women. And it actually gives place, and with cruelty, it goes on to gender-based violence that has been underestimated by this system because of the conduct and the constructions in the social environment and the relationship between men and women. So we have kept these mechanisms of subordination and discrimination. So in order to find the elements with which we can face this gender-based violence, we need to analyze these power relationships that have given privileges and hierarchy to men. It is grounded on a system that includes its state institutions, but also the society itself. This patriarchal system is expressed in machista practices that represent a series of behaviors and unequal attitudes and discriminating ones that are present in the daily life of women. This type of violence is based and it's exercised because of this subjective difference that has been presented between men and women. So, when we talk about gender based violence, we're talking about a violence that is being exercised just because you are a woman. In these are going to be present with the machista practices and gender violence on women in all the fields. So, based upon what I have said, now I would like to establish how gender violence is transferred into the political arena. Leticia said it in her initial presentation. This is supported on the inequality of the private and public arena, in which men received the ownership of representation and the power over political systems and government systems, excluding for many, many years women from public arena. Therefore, Our countries have adopted, as it has already been said, different laws with which we try to accelerate equality. In 9 countries already, they have these quota legislations and party legislations. However, in spite of the fact that we have these relationships with thinking about acknowledging rights and acknowledging mechanisms that will give place to equal. We're going to find, not only because of the experience that we have already had with quotas in the countries where they have these party legislation, we keep on that are shown in by means of different behaviors and attitudes towards women. Bolivia, to give you examples, this is the second legislation that we have with party representation of women in the legislative assembly, more than 51. We are the country that has more representation of women in parliament. However, this also shows the resistance that I've been talking about in a more clear manner. How can we see it when we try to reach equality, when we try to reach equal exercisement of rights by men and women? Well, the first resistance is change resistance to the configuration of political representation. It has already been said that it was considered the area and the field just for men. So it's very difficult for men to accept to give up this space and share it in equal terms with women. There is also a resistance to the acknowledgement and inclusion of women as political actors. And these resistances are also impeding them to exercise their rights and have access to the spaces of representation and decision making, and therefore their access is being limited, as well as their performance and the continuity in the political fields. So, what we see that is happening with gender based political violence is that democratization is being hindered and also the representation system because we have this violence against women. I would like to highlight something here that always comes out in the debate when we talk about the need to rule and legislate gender based political violence and to make a difference between a political dispute in an electoral race, which is something different. It is important to say that when you attack women because of the political ideas, that it's not gender-based political violence. But gender-based political violence is actually manifested and shown in another manner that needs to be worked on in order to have effective laws. And I mean that that violence appears when it's the attack has to do with gender stereotypes and the traditional roles of women as mothers or wives, or when they uh, argue inferiority because of being women. Because we have talked about how they question their capacity, their capability, their performance when they want to undermine this assumption of equal participation and acknowledgement of the work that they do in equal conditions. And another very important element is the use of stereotypes in politics. in order to use them as a mechanism for gender-based violence against women. We have already talked about many of them during previous presentations in this session. They not only impact that woman against they are being sent, but it has a greater impact because it sends a message to the wider group of women, and that includes us, as it has been said by Linda Repro in her analysis. Political violence then expresses the lack of acknowledgement of gender equality between women and men. Now, in this context of acknowledging how gender violence is being expressed in the political arena, we have also had progress because the states are the ones that have to protect the rights. Therefore, they are the ones that have to develop the conditions to protect this vulnerability because as we have more women participating in politics in the cases in that of countries that we have already reached parity, there is more gender-based political violence expressed. So this space of representation is not actually managed appropriately, and they always find mechanisms to exclude women, or the cost of their participation results so high for those of us that have been able to be in representation posts. We have, for example, the reflection of the legislation in the aspect that the state is the one that has to guarantee that. We have Bolivia, Mexico, Ecuador, and Panama. It is very interesting to see. Well, Bolivia just passed the law in 2012, the law for political organizations. It includes a specific procedure for the treatment of violence in political institutions in the case of Bolivia. Now, for the case of Mexico, the scope of the comprehensive reform that has just been passed has already been explained, have already been explained. In Ecuador and in Panama last year, they approved a specific laws as well. And we hope that this trend allows to continue progressing to improve the situation that we have in our electoral laws mainly, but of course in the laws for the protection of women political rights. It is important to say that we also have international standards. We have regional standards that have already been proposed. For example, SIN has already filed a proposal so that countries can take as a reference that to draft laws in the political arena, and the regional consensus that have created from by the CPAL also present the need to approach the issue. So what's actually the expression of these laws? Are they actually covering the scope of the whole rights in the different stages of the political cycle? Well, we need to establish that this political violence is in the parties, in the political organizations. It is also present throughout the electoral processes in the campaigns, and it is also present when women have already been elected by vote or when they are appointed for public office. This violence has also common expressions in all the fields. If we go through what's happened in the political party during the electoral process on when women have been elected as minorities, we see the expression now of psychological, physical, sexual, symbolic, and even economic or patrimonial violence that goes into these three spaces, especially when these unequal practices happen, which are addressed to the reduction of the prestige and question the capacities of women. Just from the point of view of gendered bias. So these are the characterizations that are going to be lived throughout these three stages or these three um, positions. This is like the very first element in which political violence is activated because as it has already been said that the list already show the possibilities of access to the space of representation or is presenting the debate to be part of public administration. Here is when we have the expression of the first behaviors without not saying that there are not others. And this fight for the representation in primary elections within the political parties by placing these quotas of women, it's a clear reflection that women were always in the lower levels. And now we are still fighting for vertical, horizontal parity that women are on the top of the list as well, so that we can actually guarantee the conditions of equal participation. But of course, here we have, the different mechanisms that have been mentioned throughout the presentations. And another important element that we consider very important is that when we have to face inequality of conditions in the electoral race during campaigns, we cannot overlook the reason that they usually reduce the capacity of women or consider them less. For example, the amount of money assigned to their campaign is reduced, and also the displacement in the territory and the use of materials. The gap between what women receive and what men receive is just enormous. The participation in the political spaces, in the communication means and all that, I can say that there is no equality at all. Everything that they ask women and then what they ask men, the topics that are addressed with men and women are differentiated by gendered based ideas. And now, with this time of the pandemic, the social media has now an explosion of threats and fake messages that are addressed to reduce and denigrate and humiliate women. And it's just the idea that they want to reduce the presentation of women just because we are women. And in the third sphere, as I said before, it's related directly to the fact of affecting women who are already in a public post. The complaints and the reports requesting their replacement by a man and not honoring the time of the office for which that woman was elected, or to talk bad about her performance. You know, there are many women, it happens in all the levels. There are cases in which even the space in which she is going to work, or her access to a computer or to any work material is totally put behind to undermine her performance. And for as this, we have many more examples on how women are always undermined, not only because they talk about their capacity, but also they use mechanisms of sexual harassment, defamation, so that they can expose them from the space that they have had access to. We have also their performance being linked to this type of prejudice. So, what they are doing with the new laws that have actually classified these type of behaviors as sort of crimes, now we can continue with the classification of crimes regarding gender-based political violence as an electoral crime, because that gives electoral bodies the authority so that this violation of rights that women are receiving in their political performance can be addressed, protect, and also uh, relieved. This is what laws are allowing us with respect to the creation of sanctions. The classification of violence, it's been quite resisted in many countries when we talk about this. And it has to do with the fact that they are limiting the conditions of protection that can actually be activated with the use of a law. These laws have also given responsibilities to the electoral bodies and the district attorneys and the enforcement offices, at least in these four countries that have opened the road in order to challenge the situation in the region. And also, we are looking at the need of debating what's internal democracy in political parties and political organizations, especially because the exercise of political violence has to do also with the transformation of power relationship and exclusion relationships that are created from the political party and then flourished in the political systems and democratic systems. So, the debate of democracy in the political parties and organization has to do with the acknowledgement of equality, with the use of these different mechanisms of inclusion of women in terms of equal participation, but it also has to do with appropriate regulations within the political parties on gender-based violence and political harassment. Because yes, it is possible that we can go into political offices with equality, but if we still have political violence permanently in all of the other spaces, of course, that hinders the development of a democratic exercise in the representation areas where women need to be part of it. And one last thing that I want to talk about is the need of transforming the institutions and its patriarchal institutions. Women are going into the political arena and have political violence experience all the time. And the political institutions are not yet modifying their practices, and they generate an important resistance with respect to equality, and they are undermining the conditions of democratizations in all the spaces. When I talk about the institutions and its structures, is because they are the ones that sent women into this parity inclusion. However, they have to face this lack of acknowledgement situation, which is translated into political violence. That cannot be the cost that women need to pay, and that cannot be the cost that democracy needs to pay, because those spaces that are not open for equality become the expulsor of women by doing those practices. By no doubt, the progress that we have seen in the countries that have already passed gender-based political violence laws are changing the political system. So the challenge is that we have to actually enforce these legislations and create cultural changes, but also institutional changes in our democracies so that we can actually have not only inclusive, equal, equal institutions, but also democracies with these characteristics. So I close by saying that in order to eradicate gender-based violence in general and in the political arena is the challenge that we need to face in order to reach democratization in our countries. And in order to achieve it, we need to understand the grounds of that violence, the support of that violence, and see how we can eliminate those elements that undermine democracy, and how by doing that we will be contributing to the strengthening of our democracies in our region. We are on a road in which this problem on which this problem has just been addressed. And I believe that if we understand fully the implications, we will be able to continue with the transformation and contributing with our democracies in our regions. I hope I didn't take much time, more time than what I was allowed, and I am here at your service so that we can continue with this insights. Thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Katia, very much. It has been wonderful to be able to listen to you. You set forth the context of Latin America quite clearly regarding the progress that we have had in guaranteeing the political rights of women. In your presentation, you were sharing the implications and the scope of political violence that is gender-based. Where are the cases that they arise? Violations that can be physical, psychological, sexual, symbolically, or economically, and also harassment that occurs in media and social networks. We think that we have a specific challenge there. So now we are going to answer some questions that have been sent to us by our viewers. So we are going to give the floor to Leti Bonifaz because she is going to have to leave quite soon. And so the question for her is, based on your presentation, we can see that the uses and customs of indigenous peoples could constitute an obstacle for the free participation of women in politics. Your opinion, what is your opinion regarding the factors that could cause this political, social, and cultural transformation in this area? Unfortunately, they are not going to change soon. That's why we have to work community per community, just like we have done in Chiapas with our institute. because we can't have uses and customs that goes against human rights of women. But we can't impose, we have to convince. So this convincing takes time. We can't say in how much time, but it's just going to take time. That's the case. Thank you very much, and we wish you the best of your success in your activities. We also have a question for Katia. What should be done to change these stereotypes that exist in the society against women? Well, fundamentally speaking, I think that we are going through a process of transformation in terms of recognizing equality among men and women. And since this is a cultural and political process, I think that if laws maybe don't transform thoughts, but they do allow us, first of all, to recognize an issue. And it also allows us to put this on the political agenda, and with the answers from the states, a series of elements that allow us to protect the rights of men and women, in this specific case for equality in political representation. So the first element, in my point of view, to change these stereotypes have to do with the new cultural references that we are building. With the arrival of women in the political life, we can recognize that it's not just a space where you'll have a dominance of men. Instead, we have enlargement of the democracy. We are challenging models, and we are also challenging the recognition of equality. I insist on equality because equality is seen as a formal aspect of laws. However, we are going forward when we truly do specify which elements hinder reaching that equality. I consider, in the case of Bolivia, everything that had to do with the process of building parity and recognition of the participation of women in the political sphere. And this has generated, I have the symbolic reference also, and this has allowed us to have the elements that are necessary to go against the stereotypes that naturally women would have to be at home and men in public life. And we see that this is changing, and we are generating a new reference of the construction of equality. Women are no longer considered as people that just have to be at home or in private companies. Now we fight against the discrimination, which is precisely what we want to accomplish in these areas of transformation. When we recognize ourselves equally as men and women, our societies will have reached a condition of representation, and our democracies will have a representation of the true interest, visions, and proposals that can transform a society that women can include in the political life. So these are the steps in a process that's longer. We have a perspective in the region of discussion on parity, and it states that aside from women being able to represent under equality in the decision-making spaces, be able to contribute to the construction of democracy and society, so that we can reach an elimination of these stereotypes that discriminate, but above all, power relationships that are uneven between men and women. So I truly think that we are contributing. For example, us who are right here and thinking and reflecting on these topics, I think we are working towards transforming these stereotypes, and that the references do not continue on like we usually see in the political life specifically speaking for this topic. Thank you very much, Katia. I want to tell you all that because of this topic and because of the quality of our experts and panelists, the truth is that we are getting many questions. However, we do not have time to answer these questions. We have run out of time, and out of respect of your time, we want to respect the time assigned to us. We have had the opportunity to listen to amazing participation that give us the latest in what we are doing in this violation of women's rights. I'm going to give the floor to Raúl Contreras, who is the director of the Law Department, and he will conclude this event with his intervention. Osvaldo, thank you very much. I want to congratulate you for being an excellent moderator in this event. I think that the interventions that we have heard allow us to see that we have had a true banquet of knowledge in honor of the International Day of Women. I want to congratulate all the women who participated and thank you for sharing information with all of us. So now I have written down some things what Leticia Bonifaz talked about regarding the problem that is generated in the displaced places where men feel that they're losing their spots in politics and in political life. And the only thing that to differentiate one man from another are the talent and capability. So we have to continue fighting against this obstacle race that women have to go through because they have proven their capacity. And I think that what we see today is proof of the talent and capacity that these women have. I think that these activities allow all countries to learn. And I wrote down this observation that Luciana made, that in Brazil, only 15% of the House of Representatives have women. And I think it's very important for us to hear what they are doing in other parts of the world and see what actions have been taken to go forward so that in Mexico today we can have a legislature with parity of gender. The reforms that were published in our country in 2020 surely will have an influence on the consolidation of parity of gender in elections, just like what Carla referred to. And I think that in one way or another, it's quite clear to us that today the political parties are the main object that we should direct our work to make changes. Yes, of course, they have to be ethical, but we see that it's not always easy. I take on the reflection of Katia that the resistance to change that men have has to be conquered, just like I said in the beginning, through cultural change of education. Just like education changed the scenario for women when women were allowed to go to school, go to the university, changes were generated. Now the right to education is a full human right, and we have to insist on this human right because it's worthless to have constitutions and international treaties. They have a long list of rights of guarantees. But if people don't know about these rights, if people don't understand these rights, if they don't act on these rights, well, then they can't even defend them, of course. So I think that the true change is through education, and we will have to continue going forward. And I think that this seminar takes us in that direction. So we talk about a cultural change that has to take place. And it's not a short process, of course, but reforms are not enough to make these changes. Currently, we see this case that the President Councilor Chacon talked about a candidate that can be presented to contest to be the governor of Guerrero. and there are many complaints against him for sexual harassment. But the political party ignored these complaints, and it seems that they are going to insist on having him run for governor. So as far as what I understood from Carla, well, this will definitely be impugnated or contested in the local and federal courts, and we will have to continue in our struggle to make these changes. We have to democratize democracy. And just like Katia said, I think that what INE is doing and the law school is doing is great. So I want to congratulate us all for having these amazing panelists and to having all our viewers with us and having your patience. Thank you all so much and congratulations for the organization. All of you, I want to say thank you for this sixth edition that once again has been a complete success. I send you all a kind hug. Good afternoon. Thank you all very much. Thank you all. Luciana, thank you. Hugs all the way to Brazil and Bolivia. Thank you. Have a wonderful weekend. So we conclude. I hope you have an amazing weekend. The next session will be on Chile and will be on the 19th. I can't even remember what day is today. I apologize. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Hey, Mari.
Annalise.
¿Ya traes la camiseta puesta, doctora Alanis?
Aquí estaba, estoy en 3, pero escuché todo. Los quiero
Miss
mucho.
Alanis, I see you have the right shirt on. Yes, I listened to all of you. It was incredible. Thank you.
Thank
Chao.
you.
Gracias, hasta luego.